Hello, welcome back. I'm happy, as always, that you're joining me here. Today, I want to invite you to question everything that you now believe. Just that, and nothing less. So please don't stop short of questioning the foundations of everything you now believe about yourself, about your brother, other people, in other words, who you are, the world, everything that you've taught yourself. I invite you to question everything that you have taught yourself. This, incidentally, is not an injunction that I'm simply making up. The workbook for students invites us to do just this. And as we move on to another section of the text in A Course in Miracles, chapter 11, section 7, specifically today, the problem and the answer, I invite you to question everything that you now believe, the very foundations of it. In other words, that this world actually is real, that this is you, it's not you. If you haven't begun to question that actively, I invite you to. Why is this so important? It's because we've taught ourselves amiss. We're wandering about when we think that we're an individual, when we think we're separate, when we think that this organism, this thing that is 80% water, constitutes us, that this thing's life is our life. When we think this and believe this and then act accordingly and continue to spin in what seems to be an endless round of suffering and chaos, warfare, insecurities everywhere we look, when we think that this constitutes our reality, we're learning amiss. We've accepted no guide at all. It's not that we're misguided. It's that we've accepted no guide at all. This is what we're invited to do, is accept a guide, the guide, our inner teacher, this part of our mind that speaks for God, for truth. It's known in A Course in Miracles by the Holy Spirit. You may call this inner teacher whatever you like. You've heard me say, if you've tuned in to some of these videos, it could be that many of you have seen well over 100 or 200 of these or more, or perhaps this is the very first time. I invite you to consider this to be your first time. When we sit down for a meditation practice, after all, we do it as though we're doing it for the first time, without our preconceived notions, without our thinking what that we know, without thinking that we know what everything means, without thinking that we know all of the answers. Because a know-it-all, which is what we are when we seek to do all this by ourselves, will never ask. When you think that you know it all, you'll never ask. You will not ask questions, being all knowing, so you think. We're invited to set this sense of all knowingness, thinking that we know all ends. We're invited to set that aside and listen to the teacher who actually does know all ends. This course is very simple. It is. You've heard me say that. It can't be repeated often enough. I mean, really, we can't state this and restate this often enough. It's very simple. And perhaps you think that you don't need it. Okay. Perhaps you think that you don't need a course that says reality is true. That's the simple truth. Truth is true. At the end, perhaps you think you don't need something that simple. Well, do you believe it? Jesus asks us this right here in paragraph 1. Do you believe it? Do you believe that reality is true? Do you believe that truth is true? Or do you believe that truth is a pipe dream, a fanciful and elaborate fiction, the product of wishful thinking and daydreaming, woo woo, far out, esoteric, and out of touch with reality? And it could very well be that you don't often stop and ask that very question. So I invite you to. This course is all about clarifying our perception. We do not see things as they are. We're invited to, under the guidance of our inner teacher, learn to see things as they really are. We think we're separate. We're not separate. We're invited to see that we're not separate. How do we do this? We put these ideas into practical, moment to moment action. It's through our experience of forgiveness that we learn that we're simply perceiving amiss, and we learn to perceive correctly. Then perception is easily translated into knowledge. Knowledge is awakening. Knowledge is beyond words. It's beyond perception completely, because perception involves a subject and an object, a perceiver and the perceived, objects that appear all around us that we, the perceiver, appear to perceive as separate from us. So, in order for us to know God, in order for us to awaken, if you want to call it that, to become enlightened or to realize God or to go home, whatever terminology you wish to employ here, in order for us to do that, we must learn to perceive truly. That's what this course is about. Once we do, perception is easily and instantaneously, I might add, translated into knowledge. Truth dawns of itself. So the end of the world is not destruction. It's not its destruction. It's its translation into knowledge. It's its reinterpretation. Who will help us to reinterpret everything that we experience? Well, our inner teacher. That's who. But we must be willing to ask for help. We must be willing to accept that of ourselves we can do nothing, that we don't have all of the answers. and that, in fact, we really do need a course that teaches the extraordinarily simple message that truth is true. It's truth. What else would it be? So in paragraph 2, Jesus references the passage from the Bible that instructs us to become as little children. Okay, so here's what's meant by that. Ask. A child recognizes that they don't understand what they perceive. So what do? They ask. Just that. Be willing to accept that you don't have all the answers, that you don't have it all figured out, and ask. Ask your inner teacher. That's all. Because again, if you think that you know the answers, if you think you have it all figured out, you'll never ask. This makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, if we've got it all figured out, we're not in a state of mind where we're willing to accept that, oh, maybe we don't. And maybe we might want to start asking a couple of questions. Yeah, maybe, just maybe. Right? This sounds obvious. It does. Of course it does. If you're thinking, okay, well, duh. This sounds so obvious. It is. It is. It's precisely this simplicity that we neglect, and we're very prone to neglect it over the course of daily life. Of course we are. We're bombarded with one phenomenon after another. We pick up our cell phones and we're blasted with data and pixels and messages, and a lot of them, almost all of them, sometimes are completely fear-based messages. Are they not? You happen to have stumbled across a message from the Holy Spirit, so you would do well to pay attention to what lands for you here. What hits home for you today, and what resonates with you today? You're invited to pay particular attention to that. That's your inner teacher speaking to you. The simple fact here is that we don't recognize anything that we perceive. Let's start with that because that's a great starting point. I don't know what's going on here. The more I think I know, the less I do. That kind of thing. That's why, if you have been through the workbook or you're going through it now, the first few lessons in the workbook are seemingly bizarre at first glance, aren't they? I do not know what anything is for. I do not know what this cheek is for. I do not know what this screen is for. I do not know what this microphone is for. I do not know what this eyebrow is for. And then you look around the room and nothing I see means anything. That window does not mean anything. This bookcase does not mean anything. And you may find yourself thinking, what the hell? Why am I doing this? Is this spirituality? Well, yeah. What we're saying is we don't know what we're looking at. Help us see it for what it is. Just that. We have to be willing to learn from the Holy Spirit. And this willingness to learn from the Holy Spirit involves our willingness to question everything we've taught ourselves. We haven't really taught ourselves anything because we might have some beautiful moments. You may have an elaborate lifestyle in this lifetime. You may have plenty of money. You may have everything all figured out. You may have a beautiful career, a wonderful, loving, and supportive relationship, or maybe you do, maybe you don't. We have beautiful moments along the way, gorgeous sunset walks on the beach, hugs with kids and grandkids. Maybe you have a dog that shows you pure, unconditional love, something like that. So we do have moments here, but what is true here in the world is that they don't last. When it's only reality that's true. God, the peace of God. It's why we're invited here in A Course in Miracles to want the peace of God and nothing else. So we've got to be willing along the way to question everything that we've taught ourselves. Like, this is me. Yeah, this is me. Question that for sure. In other words, question the foundations of everything we now believe, and we're invited to resign as our own teacher. It may seem threatening to the ego. Of course it does. The ego is perpetually threatened after all. But what is really going on here is we're allowing truth to be just as it is. We're willing to listen to the Holy Spirit. We're willing to listen to our inner teacher, the voice for God. We're willing to allow ourselves to be shown by admitting that we don't know. We teach our kids to ask. If you have served in some capacity as a teacher or as a professor or as an instructor, then you'll have at one point or another, hopefully often, encouraged your students to ask questions. You're invited to ask questions. It's just this principle. Ask. Recognize you don't know. Ask. Recognize you don't know. Ask. You'll be told. Recognize you don't know. You'll be told. The Holy Spirit won't withhold anything from you, but you have to be willing to ask. It's your willingness that matters. And this resignation from the position of your own teacher is not a ball of stress, but it's a profound relief. This is something that we all must learn to do here on the spiritual path, is resign as our own teacher and accept the tutelage, accept the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and learn to relax and trust. This part of our mind that speaks to us of who we are does know all ends and will guide us. We've only to allow it, accept and allow. So, this recognition that, hey, I don't have all the answers, I'm going to ask. It's very basic, it's very fundamental, and it's critical, very, very important. Okay, so since that is the theme here today, you're invited to ask questions here. Yes, we're all invited to ask questions of our inner teacher, but you may very well be called or inspired to type in a question or a comment here on YouTube. And if you are, I invite that. Please feel welcome to leave questions. There's no such thing as a question that's too beginner level or too basic. There could be somebody that's been studying and practicing this material for 30 years that needs to hear this question all over again for the first time, approaching everything as though we don't have all of the answers. This in Zen Buddhism is what's known as beginner's mind. This term has become quite prevalent in modern popular spirituality, and for very good reason. It's coming in to watching a video or reading or a prayer or a conversation with your inner teacher without your preconceived notions, without thinking that, hey, I don't really need this. I've got all the answers myself. I'm just kind of doing this because I don't really know why. Now it's leaving that at the door, so to speak, setting it aside and assuming that you know nothing. On this blank slate, on this blank canvas, the Holy Spirit will write, he'll paint. If only you allow it, your perception will look different. That's the point. Thank you, as always, for tuning in here. I'd love to have you subscribe if you have not already. This is the subscription button here. That's the arrow in the corner of your screen. When you click or hover over that, you'll be prompted to join us, and I hope that you do. These conversations are very in depth. You deserve nothing less, and you're interested in A Course in Miracles after all. So I invite you to open it up and begin to allow your inner teacher to instruct you. He's instructing you right now. Questions and comments are always welcome, as always. So thank you very much for tuning in. I will speak to you all very soon.